The police riot radicalizes SDS, turns it from a debate club into an army of militants. And while some members still want to focus on building a peaceful mass movement, Bernardine is determined to channel their rage, to up the level of protest and provocation.
SDS is not, and the movement in this country is not something that exists during the school year and is going to start up again in the fall, and that they have to worry about whether we're going to be in the streets in the fall. We're going to be on the streets and in every institution in this country from now on.
It all comes to a head at the 1969 SDS convention in Chicago.
These are leaders of the nationwide youth organization that calls itself SDS, Students for a Democratic Society.
I'm Mike Klonsky, National Secretary of SDS, and this is Bernadine Dorn, Interorganizational Secretary.
Bernadine and a group of student activists are out on the street outside the convention hall.
Of SDS, we've always been quite willing to talk about.
We'll talk about socialism anywhere, in the streets or in the Senate, anywhere, you know.
Mike Klonsky, one of SDS's two other leaders, is talking over her, but she doesn't seem to mind. They're having a good time with the reporters, giving this crazy impromptu press conference, playing to the crowd.
Is there a communist faction making a big power play for SDS at this time?
Is there any communists back here?
That's my mom laughing. In fact, the whole thing is kind of funny. Inside, the convention is a circus of counterculture college students. It's like a Model UN meeting on acid. A cramped, sweaty auditorium, more than 1,000 delegates. People are making speeches, moving and seconding proposals. Others are smoking pot, getting in shoving matches on the convention floor. All of it kind of ridiculously under Robert's Rules of Order. And then, on the third day, Bernadine is up on stage, about to give another speech, when the Black Panthers walk into the hall. In sunglasses, leather jackets, bucket hats. What are they doing there at a SDS meeting?
It would have been weird to have a national convention in Chicago and to have the Panthers not be invited to speak.
In other words, she's invited them.
You know, it was a time where Black power was ascendant, and the line was, you know, you should be a supporter, an ally, a revolutionary alongside of us. But, you know, your challenge was worse than ours, organized white people. And so that's what we tried to do.
Not everyone in SDS agreed with this strategy. I'm not going to unpack all the complicated factionalism going on inside the organization at the time. There's too many acronyms, too many obscure political lines. But the central conflict breaks down into one single existential difference. On one side, PL, Progressive Labor, believes the revolution will come from the working class, that students should become workers themselves, organize in factories and hotels, help build a broader class consciousness. On the other side is Bernadine.
You can't talk about class in the United States without talking about race.
And her group, the Revolutionary Youth Movement, known in SDS as the Action Faction.
You have to take action. You have to do something.
They're trying to follow the example of Black and brown people fighting nationalist struggles overseas, to build a small but militant resistance, like the Viet Cong, the Cuban Revolution, the Tupamaros in Uruguay. Or here at home, the vanguard of the revolution, the Black Panther Party.
They were a rising force, and they were well-known, deep, had a radical platform.
When the Panthers walk into the convention hall, SDS members like Eric Mann and Jeff Jones can feel the energy shift.
And they went to the microphone and they said, "We will judge SDS by the company it keeps, and PL is no good."
That was the dramatic moment. That's when everything changed.
Shaka Walls, the Panther Deputy Minister of Information, tells the convention the Black Panthers are the vanguard because they've shed more blood than anyone. And, referring to PL, these armchair Marxists haven't even shot rubber bands. Jeff Jones remembers this as a turning point.
And so there were hundreds of us in the Coliseum. And what happened at that moment was chaos, confusion. The people affiliated with Progressive Labor began to boo the Panthers. Our position was we follow the leadership of the Black liberation struggle. And so this was a very challenging moment.
Even more challenging because after Shaka Walls accuses white activists of being useless, dead weight in the struggle, he starts mansplaining the role of women in the revolution. We believe in the freedom of love, he says, in pussy power. Someone asks about the role of women in the movement, and another Panther, Jewel Cook, says, "You sisters have a strategic position in the revolution. Prone." Female activists start booing. The place is in an uproar. Mark Rudd, the third SDS national officer, remembers it as a full-blown cultural revolution moment.
So immediately the Progressive Labor Party kids took out their little red books and held them up and started screaming, fight male chauvinism, fight male chauvinism. And so the rest of us held up our little red books and screamed, fight racism.
Bernadine is on stage at the podium.
And it was complicated because things were said about women that were not cool. But, things were said about the black struggle that was cool.
She has to decide what to do.
Whenever white people have a choice, you can't make that choice without thinking about how easy it is to not stand up for black people at a given moment. I never felt like I wasn't choosing women, but I felt that, the essential American dilemma is white people standing up not just once, but consistently over time against the apparatus of black slavery. Yeah, that one's easy for me, in fact, and not that complicated.
My mom's a feminist, but she's never seen women's equality as separate from anti-racism. If anything, she sees the Panthers, the majority of whom were women, as important feminist allies. Or as Angela Davis puts it,
she knew exactly how to make those connections long before the term intersectionality had ever been introduced, at a time when we hadn't yet developed the vocabulary that allowed us to talk about gender issues in an intersectional way. I read some of her communiques and my reaction was always, right on.
So Bernadine makes her choice.
And then there's a quick little huddle up at the front of the room around the podium. And I was on the periphery of that. Bernadine was at the center of it. And the discussion was going back and forth and back and forth. And literally, Bernadine stopped the discussion. And she said, "There's no discussion."
White youth must choose sides now. We must either fight on the side of the oppressed or be on the side of the oppressor.
She grabs the mic, says, "We're siding with the Panthers. PL is out. If you're with us, follow me."
And the place went nuts. It was mainly yelling and booing and applauding. And for a lot of us, it was a challenge. That moment was an extremely challenging moment. It was a decisive moment. What were we going to do? Were we going to follow her lead?
Many did. Around a third of the delegates left the convention with her. Bernadine's walkout split SDS in two. And in fact, some people, like fellow SDS leader Mark Rudd, have come to see this as the moment the peace movement went bad. The end of the good 60s and the beginning of something else.
We created a split in the anti-war movement around the right to revolutionary violence. It's bullshit.
But from Bernadine's point of view, the good 60s hadn't stopped the war, hadn't stopped the assassination of black leaders. She thinks the only way forward is to respond to the intensifying violence from the government, to follow the example of the militant black liberation struggle and fight back by any means necessary. SDS is not the only radical organization splitting apart at the time. The Panthers are also starting to fracture over similar questions, whether to pursue a mass movement or radical violence, expansion or escalation. We'll get to that in future episodes. For now, what's left of SDS after the walkout is a much smaller group, the Action Faction, the hardest of the hardcore. Just Bernadine and her most radical comrades. They call themselves Weathermen, after a line from Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. It's a way of saying the revolution is coming, like it or not. We could tell you, weathermen could tell you, but we don't even need to, because you can see it with your own eyes. And we're not going to wait for it either. We're going to make it happen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rev Left Radio. All right, on today's episode, we have back on the show Eric Mann, an absolute veteran of the class struggle here in the United States, a real revolutionary elder that is still organizing, still has such clear-sighted and sharp theoretical analysis, is still totally committed theoretically and practically to Marxism and the revolutionary struggle for liberation. We had him on before for part 1, in which he tells his life story. This is part 2, where we continue his life story, his organizing, his personal friendship with Howard Zinn, the book he wrote on Comrade George Jackson, how he just got out of prison, and he just got out of prison when George Jackson was killed, and began, writing articles and stuff about George Jackson that culminated into a book. He talked about his time organizing within the UAW as a communist, some of the contradictions in the American trade union, some of the reactionary attitudes you bump up against, but also, trade union consciousness, the pros and cons and limitations of it. We talked about the Hard Hat Riot, which was an instance in which ostensibly representatives of the working class, a bunch of construction guys in literal hard hats, attacked an anti-Vietnam demonstration, physically, violently beating up anti-war protesters, highlighting a contradiction about the labor aristocracy in the imperial core. And throughout this conversation, although we are kind of tracing the arc of Eric's personal life and organizing history and his fascinating friendships and relationships to many left-wing figures, authors, organizers, etc., that all, organizations like the Weather Underground, the SDS, SNCC, CORE, as we trace that trajectory, we're also touching on all that history and analyzing all that history. And we end this discussion on a discussion about contemporary fascism and how a settler colonial state like the United States is a permanent fascist state. It is not a bourgeois democracy descending into fascism. And I think he makes a really articulate and important argument about why the United States is intrinsically a fascist state, and why, framings like framing the U.S. as bourgeois democracy gives it too much credit, that we should be really thoughtful about. We talk about operating on the shop floor, establishing yourself as a serious worker to be a labor organizer. We cover so much stuff. And it's a really fascinating conversation. And again, we have connections to history and traditions. There are comrades that came before us, and this is an obvious point, but I say that to say that when we have somebody on the show like Eric Mann, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for those of us, that are younger, that are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, to learn from somebody who was doing this before we were born, that went to prison for doing this before we were even born, that was organizing on shop floors, organizing in black communities, before many of us had any political consciousness at all, or before many of us were even born. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. I really want people to check it out. I also want to remind people that we still have a relationship with Left-Wing Books, which is connected to the publishing outlet and blog Kerspleblideb, where Rev Left listeners can type Rev Left at checkout and get a 15% off any book in their store. And they have, so many wonderful books. I just looked up some stuff because we're talking about George Jackson in this episode with Eric. They have books Prison on Fire, George Jackson, Attica, and Black Liberation. They have When Dragons Fly, Select Writings from New African Political Prisoners, Meditations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, Lumpen, the autobiography of Ed Mead. They have a bunch of stuff on Palestine. They have a radical Jewish calendar, which I think is really cool. Various calendars like a Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners calendar, stuff like that. Just a great collection of resources and material that they're giving all Rev Left listeners 15% off. So you can just go into that store, get anything you want, and get 15% off just by typing in Rev Left at checkout. It's a really cool little thing where, we have a connection. They share a similar spirit and politic, and if we can help one another out and direct each other to one another's work, it's a mutually beneficial thing. So go check them out, show them some love, get some good resources and books in the meantime at a discount. And without further ado, here's my conversation with veteran and elder of the movement, Eric Mann. Enjoy.
Hey everybody, this is Eric Mann. How do I introduce myself? Well, I think I'm going to start with my book. This will be a conversation also. The author is revolutionary, the revolutionary is author. The author is book promoter. The centrality of books is a big theme in my understanding of revolutionary theory and practice. So the book I'm working on is called We Made the Revolution with Our Bodies on the Line, the journey of a core SDS, UAW, and strategist and organizer. And it begins with we made the revolution with our bodies on the line. In terms of today's conversation, I want to make the case that after all the ideology, which is critical in the theory, are you willing to put your body on the line, work on an assembly line, march for the people of Palestine, knowing that there will be police brutality? The question of commitment and sacrifice is a very humbling experience, because you can think you're really great, but when those police come, you understand you look to the person on the left and the person on the right, and that's what the revolution means. So that's my introduction. And Breht, again, a real pleasure to work with you. I'm ready to the question.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you back on. It's an honor to be able to speak with you. As people will have known, having listened to the first episode, you're a veteran of this movement. You've dedicated your entire life struggling and organizing to try to build a better world. And, the sacrifices you've made in your life in pursuit of that are really admirable, and so it's a genuine honor to have you on. I'm so glad to have you back, and I enjoy our behind the scenes conversations as well. So and I was going to actually bring this up, as I recently had dinner with Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers, who are your friends and comrades, and I brought you up, and they had nothing but wonderful, kind words to say about you, and you could tell, like, when I mentioned your name, they both lit up. They both had smiles on their faces, and so to see that respect between people that go back decades, it was a really cool thing to see. So I just wanted to mention that to you as well.
Well, that's very important to me because, in my book, critical of a lot of the political choices that Bernadine and Bill made, as well as phenomenally appreciative of their whole role in history and their dedication. But more importantly, we're friends. We're just friends. We never, ever lost a friendship, not even close. We learned to disagree, but they are two of the finest people I work with. I joined Weathermen because of them. They were very good recruiters and organizers. They've gone out to live just a very exemplary life. So it's mutual, and thanks a lot, Breht.
That's awesome.
And thanks a lot, Billy and Bernadine. If you're out there, I send you nothing but big love.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So the last conversation you and I had, it left off around your prison sentence and getting out of prison. I'll link to that first episode in the show notes. I'll release that a day before, so most people will have caught up on it. But after prison, you turned to journalism and political writing. You wrote a book about George Jackson, and you did a column with actually Howard Zinn called Left Field Stands. Soon after, you joined the August 29th movement, which later merged with the Black Revolutionary Communist League to form the League of Revolutionary Struggle. So what drew you from writing about revolutionary movements to trying to build one once again inside the League? And how did those years shape your understanding of multiracial Marxist organizing in the U.S.?
Well, as they always say, great question, but I want to clarify something that I think is important.
Please.
Is that You say, what drew you from writing about revolutionary movements, trying to build one again? I'll make the case that writing about revolutionary movements, if you're part of those revolutionary movements, is being a revolutionary. When I got out of prison, I didn't think I wanted to write. Howard, my friend, I wish we'd talk about Howard maybe at the end of this, because I'm about to go on December 7th to the Howard Zinn book fair in San Francisco. And I urge anybody who's going to be in the Bay Area to come to the book fair and look for myself, Channing Martinez, and Clinton Cameron, because we're going to have our own Frontlines Press booth. And we're going to be doing a program at 2:30 to 4 about the role of books, bookstores, and revolution.
Nice.
So, and yes, you can reach me at eric@voicesfromthefrontlines.com. Note, I'm still an organizer. So the thing about writing is that what we call is the difference between affiliated, this is my wife Leanne's concept, there's affiliated revolutionaries and intellectuals and bourgeois intellectual. And bourgeois is not because of this class from which you came, it's the role you play in society. So when I got out of prison, as I write in this book I'm about to publish, I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to take a break, sort of meditate on, Weatherman, year and a half in prison, lots of time in solitary confinement. And as soon as I got out of prison, I went to Berkeley to visit my daughter, Lisa. And I'm walking down Telegraph Avenue and somebody says, George Jackson was killed. And I really say, you mean Jonathan Jackson? They say, no, George Jackson was also killed just yesterday. So that threw me immediately into, and I don't know why, I got to write about this. Now, I didn't know that there might be 100 people writing about it, but I wanted to write about it maybe as a way to extend my prison experience, to build on it rather than lose it. And I worked on this article for, it was called the Real paper at the time, which was originally Boston After Dark. And back then they could pay you. They actually, this is after the underground papers. These papers actually had a budget. And I called them up and said, I think I want to do a story about George Jackson. And they said, that'll be great. But I didn't know much about George Jackson besides Soul Another Brother. And I didn't particularly, I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to write long think pieces with history or theory. But I just sort of, had the will and the rest would figure it out. So I started writing about George Jackson. And I went through a long process of studying and meeting with, of course, people in the California prison movement. And I met with Karen Wall, an old friend of mine at Cornell, who had become one of the press spokespeople for the Cuban Revolution, especially to the West. And she worked with me on the article. Then I went down to L.A. and Tom Hayden said, you're not paying enough attention to his relationship with the Black Panthers. And I would say, really, that I probably only knew 10% of the article, but in the process of writing, I became transformed. And I'll say that again, the theory of transformative organizing is you begin by trying to transform a society. Then you try to transform the ideology of other people, such as writing a book, but then you become transformed in the process. And I became radically transformed in the process of just the process of knowledge development. So I wrote this long article, and I went back to Harper Barnes and Stu Urban, who are my editors. And Harper Barnes wrote a great book about, you'll get the name of it, Breht, about a Black uprising in St. Louis. So they sat down with me and said, look, and they were sort of afraid of me because I probably came out of prison. They said, how do you feel about it becoming a 3-part series? As if that, I said, are you kidding? That's phenomenal. So when the articles came out, it was something I had already done in Newark. I already done it with SDS in Columbia, is I'm very good at explaining militancy, making the case for violence, making the case for retaliatory violence, making the case for urban rebellions, to explain them in terms of say, now as you explained it, and this is often not just white people, but this is often white people, but even some black people. Wow, yeah, I guess if I was George Jackson, I would have done the same thing. If I was black people, I would have burned down Newark too. If I was black and white people of Columbia, I would have taken over the buildings and maybe destroyed property. So my goal was to explain George Jackson, but in the process, I have the book right in front of me. So the book is called Comrade George, Investigations of Life, Political Thought, and Assassination of George Jackson. And the most important thing I want the people to understand for most black people is political thought. That a lot of people saw George Jackson as heroic. They might have even thought Soledad Brother was a great memoir. But I said, no, George Jackson was a brilliant political thinker. And in fact, in my book, somebody, a lot of the prisoners said they killed George Jackson because of his writing.
We say the objective conditions are correct in the black community for our revolution today, that all that's missing here and there are a few of the subjective. The objective conditions are there. The subjective conditions are missing here and there. And we're moving forward on that. With our programs and with our movement. And by movement, I mean the shootout on Central, August 7th, and all attempts to, and all actual efforts made to put the fascists to death. But like I was saying, perhaps the Weathermen do understand the focal motive theory and are looking at it in a much broader sense than we are. Like before when I said the ideal embraces in its essence, in its heart, two distinct entities, a political and a military thrust. One can't exist without the other. That's why, Che died in Bolivia, because he couldn't get the political infrastructure that he needed to support his military thrust. But let's say with this last comment that perhaps the Weathermen are viewing the world situation. Perhaps they're saying that the objective conditions may not be absolutely right in a white middle class community, but the conditions are right in the black community, and the conditions are right in the world.
So here I come full circle. Revolutionary writers are people that are revolutionaries first, and they're the best ones to write because you understand the subtlety and complexity of things that no one can understand, or very few, I shouldn't say that. Very few people can understand who have not directly engaged in practice. What does Mao say? You can't understand an apple until you bite the apple. So I became a revolutionary writer because immediately when Howard Zinn called me up, he said, so first George Jackson was killed. Then I come back, and that was in August, I believe, of 1971. In September of 1971, I get a call from Howard Zinn, with whom I was very close. And he said, Eric, have you heard what happened in Attica? I said, no. And he told me this horrific story. Of course, it was all in the news, but I was probably an hour or two behind. And he said, you got to do something. And I said, of course. So I called already, I think there was an Attica Brothers Defense Committee. I called them up. I said, I just got out of the joint. What can I do? And he said, well, we're having events in Boston. We're having events all over. You can be part of the panel to explain the rebellion. Well, again, I had to first understand the rebellion. I had to understand. I didn't know the details of what's happening in Attica. I didn't know the whole backstory, or I call it the black story. So I had to learn. So I'm saying to our listeners, you got to learn first. You can't teach until you learn. So I learned a lot about the Attica Brothers. So now I'm working with the Attica Brothers Defense Committee, the Soledad Brothers Convent, and I think this Defense Committee. So my point was, I was among the leading writers in the revolutionary prisoners movement. I wrote nothing without consultation with the prisoners. I always took copious notes back then, but I also I could write in their voice because I could hear their voice. I could hear their intonation. If I'm talking to Frida Drumgo, or I actually had a meeting with Rochelle McGee, I had my notes, but then I closed my eyes and I listened to how they spoke. And so many prisoners said, "How'd you get it so right? I mean, that sounded just like me." I said, "That's the point. Of course, that's the point. I wanted to sound just like you." So what I'm getting to is today, my book, Comrade George, I mean, I've met 100 prisoners, most of them black. And of 100, I say I'm Eric Mann, they go, "You wrote Comrade George? You wrote Comrade George? We still have it. Did you know you can go throw it in solitary if you're caught with it?"
Wow.
So my book, Comrade George, is a defense of the revolutionary black prisoners movement. And it lives. We are going to republish it someday soon, like in a year, let's say. But when was that? 71? I don't know, or 30. Oh my God, over 50 years ago. The book is still in big circulation because it explains the humanity of a great man, George Jackson, the life, political thought, and yes, that he was assassinated. So what I'm getting to, Breht, is that it's not like I left writing to go back to make revolution. I wrote as part of the revolutionary movement, and then I'd often be on these panels that they wanted me to be. So I worked with the Attica Brothers Defense Committee. They told me what to do. They gave me advice on what to do. So I was what we call an affiliated revolutionary. And that's the answer to the first question. Is what did I do as a writer? And I argue that I definitely was the writer as organizer, and the organizer as writer.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you that is a crucial component of any revolutionary movement is the writers, the intellectuals, the artists, the journalists, right? I think we need a lot of journalists, especially today, in a fragmented media culture. There's lots of commentary on politics, but I think there's less investigative journalism that is in service of a revolutionary movement that I think could be very useful. I do want to kind of give you a couple minutes if you want to talk a little bit about your friendship with Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is a big figure.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more.
Yeah, I'd love to. All of us say in my book. But so the first thing is that I met Howard Zinn. I was the SDS lead organizer in New England. And, we went, there's a lot of story about building the movement, struggles of progressive labor. But what I realized, and this is also one of my themes, is I was what we called also a regional traveler. So I went to different campuses and helped them and met with the leadership. But I realized that I need to have my own base. I don't want, because if I'm going to everybody's campus, who am I? I mean, I was a regional organizer for CORE, but I worked in New York and I worked in Harlem. I worked with the Trailways bus quarters, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my book, Playbook, it says, build a base and never walk alone. So I didn't want to walk alone, and I wanted to build a base. So through my work with the different SDS chapters, I saw Boston University as sort of perfect for me. First, it had a really great chapter. So I was helping a great chapter get better. I particularly want to thank Craig Kaplan, who was, of all the different leaders of SDS, a terrific organizer, leader in the BU chapter. So I trying to build a base. somebody says, do you know Howard Zinn? Now, I think I knew of him for sure, but I went to meet this guy, Howard Zinn. Now, the first thing about Howard is he had taught at Spelman College. He was with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he wrote this book called SNCC, The New Abolitionist. So and there's also the theme about Jews. Craig Kaplan was a Jew. Howard Zinn was a Jew. Murray Levin, who we'll talk about, was a Jew. Sherry Rabino was Donnie Alpert. I mean, 80% of the leadership of SDS at BU were Jews. And Howard was a Jew. So he and I hit it off right away because we started with core and SNCC. We didn't start, and we had a theory about white students, and this is Craig's also formulation. We did not think we were revolutionaries. We thought we were radicals, and we used the word very positively, in support of the Black and Vietnamese revolution. We did not, as later as some of the white people did, including Weathermen, including the RIM, including PL, start jumping, we are revolutionaries, we are revolutionaries. And I think white people should be very careful because the odds are you're not. And the more you say you are, the odds definitely are that you're not. So the fact that we understood ourselves as white members of the civil rights movement, we were not white allies. We were both among the few white people in overwhelmingly Black current text. Now, Howard Zinn had great students at Spelman. One of them was Marion Wright, who later become Marion Wright Edelman, the Children's Defense Fund. And she's told a story about, it's in my book, I got it from something where she said, we all loved Hallie, who was called. My father was also called Howard. We'd love to go to his house. That was a place where Roz was his wife, Roz. They had the two of them. We would go there, and it would be a place where we could laugh, because Howard had a great sense of irony, or an ironic sense of humor. And it was like a safe haven. And also, Alice Walker was his student. Imagine that. And she went on, of course, to write The Color Purple and many things. The point is, often you're meeting with people who have greatness in them already. You can see it. You don't know how they're going to end up or who they're going to become. But they already are somebody. You know, you can see, I've seen it in the strategies I'll meet with a 17-year-old or a 19-year-old. I can see the greatness in them right away. My job is to elevate their greatness. So Howard and I started talking about the SDS campaign, and we both agreed that one thing white students had to do was support Black studies more. And of course, the white students who were doing great, we had to do more to build anti-war movements on the campus. And Breht, if I can just take a minute, one of the things that's important about theory about organizing is if we look at how we're going to help the people of Palestine, we're not going to end the occupation for a very, very long time, obviously, and they know that. And they're the ones who have to lead the resistance to the occupation and the racist seizure of their own country. But what people don't understand is that it's not that the protests are not important. Protests are very important. But I'd argue that the main goal is what I call institutional organizing. That's to say, getting your union to take a real position on Palestine. Because that involves talking to people and winning arguments and losing votes and then winning votes. Because the system knows that if your union takes a stand and if the university takes a stand, which they're not, you begin to erode the institutional support for imperialism. So Howard and I understood that the purpose of the organizing of BU was not just to, quote, march against the war, but to delegitimize U.S. imperialism at Boston University. So I came up with this idea of the anti-military campaign. And I got it from Columbia, where I had been working. other places in SDS, such as the Dow Chemical campaign, which was great. You block recruiters from Dow Chemical. You delegitimize Dow Chemical. You delegitimize the CIA, the State Department. So we came up with this program with 3 demands. One was to get rid of the BU overseas program, which was academics paid for BU who worked with the Department of Defense to go to U.S. military bases and talk to GIs and about education, not knowing that Howard Zinn was going to be one of the people doing the education. The second was to get rid of the Reserve Officers Training Corps. And the third was to end all military research at BU. So I had a long talk with Howard, because Howard was in the BU overseas program. And I said, Howard, I want to move to the demand to end the BU overseas program. And he said, well, it's a complicated thing because I'm doing anti-war organizing through that program. I mean, I'm meeting with the GIs in military bases to do anti-war organizing. And I said, yeah, Howard, but you're the exception to a bad institution. And we have to get rid of that institution because you don't want to be, in a certain way, legitimizing the very institution we're against. And he thought for no more than a second. He said, of course, absolutely, I'm out. I'll tell the university I'm out of the program. There's the story that I convinced Howard Zinn of something. Yeah, it is. But more importantly, Howard Zinn is a real person. Mm-hmm. He had reasons for doing what he was doing, and we could talk. And then he then he could speak against the BU overseas program, was called, because he had been in it. But it's another example of Howard, which is back then you convince somebody and they go, okay, yep, I'll challenge my corporation. Whatever you need me to do. Mm-hmm. So that was another great thing about Howard, was just that. But he became my friend. He became often my point of reference, especially with the growing sectarianism. He and I were saying, what the hell? We're trained in the black movement. Why do these white students, some of them are like on drugs? They really think they're more important than the people of Vietnam. They think they're more important than the black studies. And we have to build a chapter that has a certain sense of humility about the role of white people, that we are, in the correct sense, subordinate to the interests of the black movement, subordinate of the people of Vietnam. Subordination does not mean, God forbid I'm subordinated. Yeah, less important than, under the leadership of those struggles. Then, an interesting story is that when I was in Weathermen, Howard's daughter, and I should know who she is and where she was, but she hid me in the back of her car. She was driving me somewhere, and I had to, basically be on the floorboard because I was afraid the police were going to get me. So then, when I got out of prison, I went to see this guy, Tom Winship, who was the head of the Boston Globe. I said to him, you got a lot of liberals, a lot of conservatives. You have no radicals and revolutionaries in your op-ed department. I had influence coming out of, I was very well known in Boston. Of course, I just came out of prison. To my shock, he said, that's a great idea. You need another person. I said, I know exactly who it is. I called Howard. I said, Howard, you want to work together on this column? And he said, I'd love to. I said, what about calling it left field stands, like the baseball analogy, taking a stand, but also being in the stands of the, God forbid, the Boston Red Sox, where the hell they were. So he and I alternated columns, and we wrote every other week. It was great. We did it for about 3 years. And then I wrote my first article on Israel. And I'd already moved to Berkeley at the time. And I got called, and they said, well, now that you're in Berkeley, you don't have a feel for Boston anymore. We're going to have to end you. End you, that's a good way to say it. And I went, wait a minute, I've been in Berkeley for a year, but I'm mailing in my articles. Yeah, but this thing about Israel is just very offensive and probably said anti-Semitic even back then. So I was fired. So I called Howard and said, you should resign in protest, which is pretty arrogant. He said, why? He said, do you really believe that? I said, no. He said, okay, good. So I'm obviously, very upset that you got fired, but isn't it my job to continue the Met? I said, of course. So then he wrote something, I think, about Veterans Day and why Veterans Day was a sham. And then he got fired. So the two of us have the honor of being partners in this. And I urge people to go back and get those left field stands articles, which will be on my book. And some people were generous enough to go find them on microfiche. But those are terrific op-eds. And Howard and I, back to the right of his revolutionary, had a lot of influence, even on the movement. So there's more I can say, but the main thing I'll say that is even beyond that is Howard was very handsome, very charming, very confident, a certain way self-effacing, in the good sense. He had a sense of irony about himself. And he was one of my best friends. I got to tell this story. This is important.
Yeah.
So I wrote this. I wrote this. I used to write for the Boston Phoenix, Boston After Dark. So I wrote this article called Freaked Out by the Waitresses, Freaked Out by the Freaks. And it was all about how these people don't tip the waitress is the main point. And I've been a busboy and a waiter. And so I talk about these guys, they're talking about life and blah, blah, blah. And they asked the waitress for 16 things and leave and stiff her. So I said, what they should do is go beat up the guy and leave some blood on his tie-dye T-shirt. So, of course, I come out of prison. I have a relatively violent worldview. Howard called me up and said, that was wrong. It was such a good article. Why'd you have to deal with punching somebody? Of course, I got in prison for it, but, these are sort of contradictions among the people. You did a really good job of exposing the hypocrisy, a really good job of exposing the rights of the waitresses and defending the waiters and waitresses. But you messed up the whole point by bringing violence into it. And I defended myself, of course, but I knew he was right. I have a thing where sometimes I'm not the first. I even know I'm wrong, but I'll still fight for a while before I have to give up. And I was very influenced, but my point is we were close.
Yeah.
We were very close. So he could call me up and tell me to go to Attica. He could call me up and say, you were wrong on that. And I remember eventually apologizing to him and Roz because they really cared about me. And I thought, why am I beating up hippies who just didn't tip well enough? So there's a lot of stories in there, but it's also about I could convince him of something, he could convince me of something. What an amazing man. And that's before he wrote A People's History of the United States. And also he went to Vietnam, one of the first people to go to Vietnam. And now I'm going to the Howard Zinn Book Festival, which is magnificent. And he'll come alive in my book pretty much this way. And I'll end with sort of saying this, that, and Brent, I really appreciate this, is we were not white allies. I take, I understand there's a risk in saying that, but we were white comrades. There were very few of us. But the white people went down from the South were not white allies. There were white allies, don't get me wrong, who were amazing. But the white people went down south. Mickey Schwerner was killed, and Andy Goodman, who was killed, were not white allies. They were white comrades. And as I say, you don't join the black movement, you get accepted into it. Like you don't join Harvard. You get accepted.
Mm-hmm.
The black community would choose what role you want to play. They want you to play. And for some people, it's a phenomenon. You know, you're out of college, your friends are there. But I just want to say for Howard and I, we were part of we were whites inside the black movement. And as a result, we stood up against the sectarianism of both PL and Revolutionary Youth Movement, because they were starting to objectify the black movement and speak on its behalf, criticize it, think they were helping it by expanding their role in history that was not right. And the BU chapter never had that problem, that we saw ourselves in service to the black community, in service to the Vietnamese Revolution.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. And yeah, Howard Zinn was huge for me. Reading the people's history when I was young was a crucial turning point in my own political development. His famous quote, "You can't stay neutral in a moving train," I think is
right.
It's a perfect synthesis of like a dialectical worldview where everything is in constant motion and constant evolution, and neutrality and staticness is impossible. So I always love how succinct that quote is. And yeah, a lot of the contradictions that you wrestled with and still wrestle with among the white left, and a sort of egoism and an unwillingness to sacrifice and a narcissism that puts the spotlight back on themselves. I mean, that's certainly something that is still very relevant in movements today. And humbling yourself, realizing that here in the Imperial Core, that we're not the vanguard of the global revolution. In a lot of ways, we're the rear guard, meaning that we're here to provide unapologetic support in any way possible to the front lines of the global revolution, which are in places like Palestine and in places like the indigenous and black struggle here in the United States. And there's a way of de-emphasizing the self and the individual ego and subordinating yourself to something greater and more important than your own ego that we all have to really internalize. And I think you did a great way of explaining that. I do want to move into this next question.
Sure, thanks, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move into this next question, and I'm personally interested in this because I've recently, joined a trade union, and it's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm already starting to organize within it, and I'm making some contacts with representatives from a rank and file caucus developing within the union, which I think is really cool. So I have a lot of interesting trajectories that I can pursue now that I'm in this union. And you spent years on the auto assembly line, and you played a leading role in the Keep GN Van Nuys Open Coalition, which brought together labor and the Black and Latino communities around the plant. Can you talk about your time struggling in that context in particular? What principles allowed that coalition to succeed where so many shop floor fights failed, and kind of the overall lessons that you think are relevant to today's labor movement?
Well, thanks again. Summing up your work is so hard. I'm working again on these chapters of the book, and I was there. I was playing a leading role. But how do you reconstruct the story? How do you truly understand what happened? The fact that you were there does not guarantee that you understand what you did or what was true. It gives you a better chance. But my wife Leanne and I, and another Leanne Hurst-Mann, and another editor, Jesse Coleman, we've been working on these chapters over and over again to try to get it right, which means you study. And so having said that, I have summed this up, and luckily I wrote a book called Taking on General Motors, which I wrote in 1987, which also has to be republished, but a lot of it is going to be in the book. So let me go back to what the theory was, what I learned. And Brett, in this case, do keep asking me questions within it, okay? Because I want to make sure that the theory is following the line of argument you want. Mm-hmm. The first thing is that how did I become an assembly line worker? And by the way, Brett, I really appreciate you giving me the so-called long form, because a lot of the things I want the people listening to understand is these things are very complicated. Understanding what you're doing, looking in the mirror, working with other people is very hard to understand, and it's hard to explain what you do understand. So the first thing is that I already been in the working class. It's a long story, but I won't tell it long. But I had already been, of my own reasons, had become a nurse's aide. And then after that, an operating room orderly. That's before I became a communist. There was something about my own struggle with celebrity that I was very self-critical of in some way, and I wanted to ground myself. And I really loved being a nurse's aide, and I really liked being an operating room orderly. And I guess you're going to like, working in a factory, working in the workplace is great. So when I got to Berkeley, I had met my wife, Leanne Hurst. We fell in love. I moved to Berkeley to be with her. I lived in Boston. And the first thing she talked to me about is that we should join a new communist organization. And I had been very resistant to that. And, Britt, I haven't told this story yet, have I?
No.
Okay. Both aging and even normal, you always have to ask if you told the story already. So, and I was resistant to it because actually I had a very good experience with the Communist Party. But the Communist Party back then being in the early 60s, was very careful about sectarianism in the United Front. Plus, of course, then later Angela Davis and so many other people built the Che Lumumba clubs inside the Communist Party. But my experience had been with progressive labor. And even with REM that said they were a communist group. So I thought, I don't want to be, communism to me represents sectarianism. Communism represents thinking you're better than other people and think you know how to lead the struggle. In fact, you'll tell them that I'm a revolutionary youth movement, I'm progressive labor, leading proletarian, this and that. I came out of a different tradition, which is, and this is important, I'm working on the theory of internal cadre, or organic cadre versus external cadre. Organic cadre means you join an organization and you work very hard. You put in the most time, you take the most risks. You're most committed to building the organization. You come in early, you leave late. You think about the organization. That makes you cadre. And the people who all share that become the leaders of the organization because everybody recognizes their commitment, says, I don't work as hard as now. I don't take the risks that they do. But over time, more and more people work as hard. You get more people work. You looked at SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Well, core. I mean, there were at least 1,000 cadres in each group. I mean, we're talking about, here's a definition. You have a job, and you have a paying job if you're black in the post office or whatever. You come home, and you work 3 hours every night for core. Every Saturday, every Sunday, you go out and get arrested. You're cadre. Now, I disagree with groups, and I'll get to this later when I know more what I'm talking about. There are some groups today that want to reconstitute themselves as a cadre group. I disagree with that because nobody asked you. Nobody asked you to be cadre. You're not cadre of an organization. You're cadre external to an organization. Thinking, God forbid, you're going to go in and make it back. But you're going to have your own meetings to discuss the organization, which means you're not really in it, in my opinion. Now, in SNCC, the cadre were in SNCC. In SDS, I was cadre, but I worked with the members of SDS, and there were about 20 of us who were cadre. And they were simply the most dedicated, those who are willing to lead and build the institution. Other people would say, no, I want to be active, but thank God you guys, when I come to the meeting, somebody has the agenda, somebody knows what to do, and I can plug in. So having had all those bad experiences with both the Revolutionary Youth Movement, I want to say again, I don't have the same reaction to Weathermen. even though I'll say it again. I agreed with Weathermen when I joined it. We did what we had to do. We took the risks we had to take. In retrospect, I do not think it was a good tactical choice. But I'm very critical of the revolutionary youth movement. I'm not that critical of Weathermen, except historically, we should tell people don't do that again. You know, that's not a good idea. Okay, do not form a self-dedicated group, mainly of white people, and run out and break windows and do all kinds of stuff that's going to get you arrested and put you in jail for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a different emotional reaction to Weathermen because I joined it. Bill and Bernadine recruited me. I never had any criticism of them because they were good recruiters, and I joined with full enthusiasm. Okay, so we're getting to this. So when Leanne tells me to join a new communist group, I'm thinking I do not want to be part of a sectarian organization of self-proclaimed vanguards. But we go to these meetings, and but there's one thing that she has persuasive. Besides, I was madly in love with her, which didn't hurt. She was in a group called the Berkeley Oakland Women's Union, and they had built the first truly anti-imperialist tendency inside the Berkeley Oakland Women's Union, and they challenged the concept of socialist feminism. And they came up with the idea that socialist feminism is bourgeois feminism. Now, again, remember, these were the times of drawing lines. And they were trying to say that as much as we try, we're still white women, and we have issues. Our views of socialism are often social democratic, and we're not sufficiently anti-imperialist. And they went through hell. They were treated very badly by a lot of the other women in the group. And, you know, they were told, well, you're not really a feminist. You're male-identified. Communism is a male concept. Got pretty brutal. And in Leanne's article, which is in our now, I think on the 20th or 25th anniversary of, there's a wonderful quote from a woman who said, I've never agreed with that Thursday night group, which is the group that Leanne and Lori and Dana and Dina and Val and Pat were in. But they came in a very principled way to talk to us, and we've treated them terribly. And as a result, I must support them, despite their own arrogance, perhaps, but their own sectarianism, because they came in as sisters, and we have treated them terribly. So I was with Leanne when she went through that experience. I was very proud of her. Those 5 women met at our house, and that gave Leanne a lot of credibility with me. And also, I had to realize that, look, I'm not in any organization. I've always been in an organization. So what am I criticizing if I don't like standing on the outside of history? So we went to these fora of the communist groups, you know, the Workers' Viewpoint and the October League and the Marxist-Leninist Organizing Committee and October League. I didn't like any of them, but then this woman got up from the August 29th movement. And she was a Latina. She was in something like the Bay Area Labor Organizing Collective. And she talked about being a communist with the Farah strike at the time, being a communist in the, I forget the name of it, but a sweatshop in L.A., in the Bay Area, I'm sorry. And to me, she was a great organizer, a communist organizer. She talked about the masses. She talked about the people. She talked about working in the factory. And I was won over. I said, okay, this is not sectarian. They have their politics, but they're trying to build the actual movement of the working class. Mm. So I'll tell you more, but I joined the August 29th. Based on that, Leanne joined the August 29th. We both joined at the same time. Leanne got into the Ford factory at a time when I'm working at Alta Bates as a nurse, as a operating room orderly. And Ford had this kind of family situation they liked. They were bringing some women in, the wives of presidents. But they also, especially for women, who would probably be threatened if their husband didn't get a job, she was able to convince them to hire me. So she said, just sit by the phone and wait. And they called me and they said, you want to come in for an interview or, basically. So I got into the auto factory because of riot. I got into the August 29th movement a lot because of it. Now, once I got into the auto factory, I loved it. I just loved it. It was noisy. I love noise. The workers are so confident and so noisy again. You have to be very outspoken kind of culture, like prisoners. The jobs are hard. You're on an assembly line that's moving at 60 cars an hour, which means you have 1 minute to do the job that's right. You don't move, the assembly line moves. But you got to move in that 1 minute to get the job done. If you don't, it's called going in the hole, which is you got to keep trying to finish that job. But now you're in the next person's station. And they're saying, get the hell out of the station. Why do you keep going in the hole? You can't do the job. So you become very good at that 1 minute drill, or you can't make it as an auto worker. I'll tell you more about that. But I love being an auto worker. And I loved auto workers. There's just something humbling about that assembly line keeps going back, and you got to be good at it. I got good at it. So I was at Ford Milpitas in San Jose. We were very active in building a rank and file caucus there. And then they laid us off, which was devastating. They said, don't worry, we'll call you back. They lay you off, but don't worry. Each time you come back with better seniority. But they ended up closing the plant. So we never got called back. And as one guy said, the only way they're going to lay me off is if they close this place. And they closed the place. So this was the age of plant closings. This was the age of where the U.S. auto industry that had taken advantage of the post-war defeat of Japan and Germany and the ascendancy of U.S. imperialism. But now Japan and Germany were being rebuilt by U.S. imperialism. And their auto industries were doing great, especially Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So there was competition for the first time for the U.S. market. And that led to, in terms of political economy, that for the first time, GM could not pass on the cost to the consumer. Because the consumer historically loved GM, and whatever price they set within reason, they would pay. But now the Japanese were coming in with better cars, much more fuel economy, and people were buying Datsuns back then, which are now Nissans, and Toyotas. And so GM had to raise its profit level and start closing. All the auto factories were closing plants, closing steel mills. So through a long process, I ended up with Leanne and I decided to move to L.A. to be with her family. Turned out to be a great move. And out of that, I got into the GM Southgate plants. So excited. And then I was laid off after 3 months, and they closed that plant within a year. So it's almost like jumping from sinking ships. And I got over to GM Van Nuys. GM Van Nuys was the best plant. We were making the Chevrolet Camaro and the Pontiac Firebirds. And one thing, Breht, I was thinking about a lot, we're talking about trade unionism, is one of the limits of trade unionism, and it's not a limit as a criticism, is workers love their company. They just do. I work for Starbucks, and how dare they treat me so bad given how loyal I am to Starbucks. And I work for Amazon. And yeah, I hate it, and I know it, but I'm happy I work for Amazon and making a good living, except that they're running my life into the ground. They're running me at a pace that's just outrageous. They used to have 2-day delivery one day. I'll have to say, now they got 4-hour delivery. But who's delivering it? So, nonetheless, if you listen to trade unionists speaking, They always say, I love the company. I just don't love how that company treats me.
Mm.
And so that's, again, not a criticism. I was happy to work with GM. I was, hey, I work for GM. I'm in the UAW. Oh, damn, you're at the GM Ben Affleck. Yeah. I'm making $10 an hour. I'm $15 an hour overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And I make the Chevrolet Camaro, which is cool. And I make you make the Firebird? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you tend to identify with the product, identify with the company, identify with the union. But the only thing that happened was when the plants got closed, most of the workers went back to the company. The union would say, what can we give you? GM would say, I can't compete with the Japanese. You guys are paid too much. Look, the Japanese, they may be paid well, but they turn out more cars per hour than you. They turn out better quality than you. I need you to help me. I've always taken good care of you guys. But all your benefits, paid leave and this and that, and I can't keep the plant open if you don't give me something back. Now, the more militant workers said, F you, I'm not giving shit back, we want it. But those are often workers who did not think they were going to get laid off.
Mm.
But as you're working in a plant that is in danger of being closed, and this is an example, Breht, of you got to really have feelings for people when you work with, an empathy for what they're going through. You don't judge people. The workers would say, this is my job. I put my kid through community college. I got a nice house. Small house, but I own a house. I got 2 cars.
Mm-hmm.
And these were working class people. They were called the overpaid working class. Ridiculous. They had a car and a house.
Mm-hmm.
A big fucking deal. And they said their kids to most likely community college. But they said, if I lose this job, my whole family is destroyed. And very frankly, if I'm making 10, I can make 9. If I have all these I won't give away my medical benefit, but maybe I have to do a copay.
Mm.
Because when you talk to them, you're a real worker and you're next to them. They said, Eric, GM's given me everything I got. They don't say the UAW, but they don't.
Mm.
They say, GM has given me everything I got. And if I can help GM fight against those damn Japanese, I'm going to do so. So now you have identification with the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a material interest, that your interest in GM, contrary to the theory that the interests of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie are inherently antagonistic.
Mm-hmm.
They are in the third world. But inside the U.S. and white settler state oppressor nation, they're not. The interests of the proletariat and the interests of the bourgeoisie are often more in a line than different. That's what I believe. Especially if you ask the workers, do you support the war in Vietnam? Yes. Do you support Israel? Yes. Do you support overthrowing Venezuela? Yes. A lot of those workers are pro-imperialist, and their militancy is limited to, I need more. I deserve more. And so now I'm in a factory. And luckily, it's 50% Chicano, 15% black, 15% women, with an amazing, I get over to GM Van Nuys from Southgate, which is a miracle. GM Van Nuys is the coolest place to work. It's got 5,000 workers. Imagine that? 2,500 per shift. And Breht, large-scale production, which Marx talked about, I agree with. Mm-hmm. There's nothing like large-scale production to at least create some sense of class consciousness. And we knew we built the damn car. GM didn't build that car. GM designed it. GM even organized production. But there was a sense that we were proud of the cars we made. And we looked around, this is 2,500 of us, and we knew we built that car from beginning to end. So we also believed, not as the August 29th movement, that Chicanos were an oppressed nation inside the United States with the right of self-determination. Black people were an oppressed nation inside the United States with the right of self-determination. There were oppressed nations, by the way, oppressor nation, which meant we give a lot of attention to race. It's not like most of the workers believed that there was a black nation or a Chicano nation, but they believed something about black people being oppressed, very much so. They believed a lot the Chicanos, but the Chicanos were coming out of a different culture, a lot of them. Now, some of them came out of the radical Chicano movement, but a lot of them were very conservative in the sense that I work at GM, I work hard, and I got good stuff. And I love the stuff I have, and I don't have time to get involved in causes because I go home every Saturday and wash my car. But then the issue of plant closing started to come up. And I initiated this idea of the UAW campaign to keep Van Nuys open. And to a long story, I'll tell you some other time, I initiated the idea of a boycott against General Motors if they ever closed down the plant. The key thing there is you have to have some leverage. When you have a strategy, you have to believe, is there anything I can do to hurt my adversary? What do I have that they don't have? What leverage do I have? And most of the time now in the United States, we have no leverage. That's the problem. They've closed down virtually every form of leverage, which we'll come back to. So, but if you're an organizer, you still have to have some vision of what victory looks like. Even if it's a long shot, it has to be historically believable, at least to yourself. Now, I knew that GM could be boycotted because LA was the largest new car market in the United States. That meant that a boycott in LA alone could hurt GM, whereas a boycott in Detroit could hurt GM, but it would be very hard to do that because there'd be a lot of other plants still open. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a small town and GM's closing your plant, you have no leverage on it. So the first thing on this is we had leverage, but the most important thing is we had the Chicano and black national question. If that plant was 80% white, that campaign never gets off the ground. Because it was the Chicano and black workers who were both loyal to the company, but knew they had some oppression in the system, and they were going to fight for the Chicano people, and they were going to fight for black. So I went to Pete Beltran, the president of the union, a great man, who was Indio, Chicano, come from Mexico, handsome as hell, charismatic. And to another long story I won't tell, I go to Pete and say, listen, I have this idea of building a preemptive movement against GM to keep the plant open. Now, Pete knows me from some other contexts. Luckily, I worked on his campaign. I said, Eric, and he knows I'm a communist. Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't agree with you. The plant is in very good shape. We're not like the other plants. Our cars are the best-selling cars in the United States. We're the last auto factory in LA. They got to keep one open. He gave me about 10 reasons why GM wouldn't close the plant. I said, well, Pete, so I guess you don't buy auto insurance, right? Because you're never going to get into an accident. I said, listen, I do believe they're going to close the plants. I do believe they don't want to be in California. And I agree we have leverage. This is a great plant, and we are making a best-selling car. But the key thing we have, Pete, is 2,500 Chicanos and 750 black people and 750 women. And if they move to close the plant, I know we can organize the women's movement, the black movement, the Chicano movement, and yes, the workers' movement. Because this is, as you said, Pete, the last plant. If we were the next to last plant, I don't know. But it's pretty clear they closed down GM Van Nuys. They already closed down Southgate. They closed down Goodyear Tires. They closed down Bethlehem Steel. They've closed down all the good-paying industrial jobs in the deindustrialization of America. And we're the last decent-paying job for black people and Chicanos in the whole damn city. So Pete went, all right, you're very persuasive. I still don't think it's going to happen, but you're right. You should start this campaign, but be very careful to not tell people you're starting the campaign. He says, if you go around and say they may close the plant, if they do close the plant or threaten to, people will say, well, that's good. The union told me and the union planted the idea. So one of the things you have to understand our organizing is it's so complicated at the level of cognition, consciousness. So I had the idea of stopping the plant from being closed. But Nate Brodsky was one of the workers, a Jewish man who had converted to Christianity and sang in its choir, but he's still a Jew. He said, we can't say stop closing the plant. We have to say the campaign to keep GM Van Nuys open. Because now you're saying the word open. And you're saying keep it open is different from don't close it. I said, Nate, that's brilliant. That's fucking brilliant. You're absolutely right. It totally changes the discourse. Because we're saying we are open. You're the one who's going to close it. Don't you even dare close it because we're open. So it's another example of me and any good organizers. You are in a collective relationship with people. Their idea is better than you. You have to be a very good listener. And the collective begins to do, you begin to develop what I call the collective mind, the collective brain, where people, like in a jazz group, people start spinning off great ideas. So I'll take a break in a minute, but we initiate the campaign to keep Van Nuys open, and we are allowed to have one-on-one conversations with the top people in the union who would not be threatened by that idea. And again, you're being very nice about the time. So we started talking to a lot of workers, and they would say things like, well, if GM closes the plant, it's God's will. You know what I mean? Or GM's been very loyal to me. I don't know if I've been loyal to them. They own it, Eric, and if they want to close it, that, right? And then I talk about the 7-Eleven complex, where men would say, look, what if I open up a 7-Eleven? And somebody comes and tells me what to do. What's my damn business? I said, what are you smoking? You don't open a fucking 7-Eleven. You work on an assembly line. And if they kick your ass out into the street, the last thing you're going to be able to do is buy a 7-Eleven. You'll be lucky if you can get a beer at the 7-Eleven. So they go, all right, that's a good point. You got me there. And then over time, I would say to them, and we would say, do you think you have any rights here? I understand GM has some rights. So we did not buy the complete surplus value theory or didn't express it in that terms. We said, look, GM has some rights. They set it up. They managed to play. But don't you think you have some rights after 10 years here? Don't you think GM has an obligation to you beyond their own profit system? What if they had less profit? What do we give a damn? And they said, what are you going to do about it? Well, we have this idea for a boycott. So over time, and of course, it's very important, the civil rights movement was based on the idea that black people had rights. The Chicano movement was based on we had the right of self-determination. White people don't think they have rights in the same way. They think they just benefit. But when we start to talk of black and Chicano workers and women, including white women, by the way, and white men, they started saying, you're right. I never thought about that. I mean, I've given my best years I got a bad back. I got carpal tunnel syndrome. I said, where are you going to go with this body? Who wants your body right now? You gave GM your damn life. You got a slip disc. You have carpal tunnel. Don't you think you have some? And the people, so it's learning the art of persuasion with a deep empathy for people.
Yeah.
And they go, hey, that's a good point. I never thought about that. You're right. What am I going to? They throw me out. This body ain't going anywhere. And I said, aren't you ready to even move to light duty? Because over time you could get that done. So we started developing the idea of rights. And there's a poster we made up and said, the future of GM Van Nuys it's not just for GM to decide. Workers and communities demand a voice. So demand is very important. And if we demand a voice, what we are saying is it's not just for GM to decide. It's not your factory. We're no longer accepting it. It may not be our factory, but we goddamn a part of this factory. Mm-hmm. We have some people began to understand extraction of surplus value a lot, not through the profit motive, but through the exhaustion of the assembly line as the worst exploitation of our labor, such as the Amazon workers of the earth. The phenomenal destruction of the human body and mind. So then GM came along right on cue and brought everybody together and said, the plant is in trouble. I know you're profitable, but we need your help because your productivity is not as great. Some of the work rules prohibit us from, you got it good, guys and women. But you're going to have to give us something back because the profit level is not great enough. And if you don't give us something back, you will be closed. Now, their chief said, all right, great. Now, they're the one who said the word close. You've been saying open. You've been quiet a little bit. Maybe you've talked to 300 workers. Now you can initiate the campaign to keep Van Nuys open. Okay. So maybe we'll take a break here, and you'll tell me a lot of your great thoughts, really. And then I'll take the second level of what did we learn out of that story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just have some thoughts on organizing within a union and navigating some of the contradictions. In my experience, talking to fellow workers, so much that I've had it several months now in the union and on the shop floor. I mean industrial trades context. That there is it's interesting because there's, unlike in your situation where there was so much tied to GM in particular, to one company. We operate as a multi-contractor situation, so union workers can work for many different contractors, and if you get fired from one, you can get picked up on another, and so there's a little bit more of open hostility towards the contractors and towards the bosses as such, because there's not as much one-to-one dependency on a given contractor or a given company. So I think that's an interesting difference. But what I do see, and I think you kind of alluded to this among workers in this context, is compared to other working class people, they do have great benefits packages. They have a good pension. They have good health care coverage. They have high wages. They get overtime, time and a half, a hazard pay. They get a really good situation financially, and they do work incredibly hard. And that's so right. There is a sense in their own, like they really put their bodies on the line. There's a sense of pride in that. And there's also like kind of a sense of kind of smugness a little bit, is like, I work really hard. So when you get into a little political discussion, what I often hear sometimes, not from everybody's different, but I have heard this multiple times, is like, and this is very popular in the U.S., a disdain for like handouts. This idea that I come into work every day before the sun rises, that I break my back and that I do this hard, laborious work. And yeah, I get paid well for it, but I sacrifice and I earn that pay. And there's like a disdain for people who are seen as not earning that pay. And I'm always trying to like flip their gaze upward toward like the billionaires and the elites who actually steal our money and not scapegoat, poor and powerless people. I'm always trying to kind of navigate that. So I think that's an interesting contradiction that I see a lot. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But another thing I think is really important is to have any credibility at all within these working class spaces and in these union contexts, the shop floor, at a construction site, is you first have to establish yourself as a serious worker. That, you have to be taken seriously first and foremost as a fellow worker and a tradesman before you are taken seriously as an organizer or a political thinker, with these people. Because talk is cheap, everybody has ideas, but if you're not actually proving yourself as a worker first and foremost, you lose any credibility to then organize in a more serious way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Well, Brett, you and I love talking to each other. Both are great. I'm going to start with the last one first. The working class has a lot of respect for work, as they should. That is a basis for their respect of themselves. Now, I come in, even if the company's not right, I come into work, I come on time, I work my ass off. That gives me the moral authority, whatever demands I want to make on the company. And as you said, if you have absenteeism, if you are, you're often a partner with somebody, if they don't think you're a great partner, if they're seeing any way you slacking off, you don't even discuss about anything, let alone socialism, because they always say you're a loser. We don't even. You should get fired. I mean, you should lose your job, because if I'm getting up every day and working my ass off, and you're not. So I completely agree, and I've always been. Leanne's been a great worker. I've been there's a story. I always have stories, but one year I decided to see if I could get perfect attendance. Because there was a big thing up there, the perfect attendance group, and in a factory of 5,000, maybe, I don't know, 200 would be on that list. And that meant you were never late and never missed a day of work. And I decided I wanted to do that because I was very popular, but I was also under tremendous pressure being a communist. And with a lot of attacks on me, which we'll talk about. And I really respected the people I had perfect attendance. So one day I overslept, and I don't like driving my car fast. I don't know what I threw my clothes on, got in the car, must have been 4 minutes, tore ass to the GM Van Nuys plant. But because I was late, the goddamn parking lot was completely full. So I had to go to the end of the damn parking lot, run all the way back, and somehow I punched in at 6:29. 6:30 was the shift times. And I wasn't up at my station there, right? So by the time I get to my station, let's say at 6:35, and the relief man is there, has started your job, because they always have somebody, the assembly line must run. Got to be a relief man was flying. He said, "Okay, cool. Glad you're here. I thought you were not going to come in. Here's your, here are your tools." But if you did a lot, the relief man would go to the foreman and say, fuck this guy. Or this woman, she's always late. She got some story. She's out. He's out. So absolutely, workers respect work as they should. We're making a product. We're being paid to do something. And one of the reasons the working class has some confidence, in the good sense, is because they do feel a sense of their own value. Now, I would challenge a little bit the second theory, which is, instead of asking the workers to look upward to the millionaires, I would say you better look in the mirror. Because your arrogance, do you really know what it's like to be black, woman, with 3 kids? Do you have any clue what it's like to be beat by the police, which you're not? Do you have any clue that every member of your family is either going to be arrested or stopped by a cop, and yet it's usually racial? And even if you're black, you're making a good living. But what about your sister? You don't care about her? Well, I don't need any government programs. These government programs, white people love these programs regardless of what they say. And the way they took the word welfare, which was originally the welfare of all people, and they just turned into black, and as soon as you hear black, you don't want any part of it, including the black middle class sometimes. So I'm always able to say, look, this is a country based on slave labor. The fact that you're not doing slave labor doesn't mean that other people aren't. It's based on genocide. And if you believe in the word genocide, whether it's Palestine or black people, how dare you talk about other people who are working? Did you hear the chain gangs? Even when black people, they were enslaved. And then they're arrested for nothing, and they're put on a damn chain gang. So we should be, nothing wrong that we get paid well. But nothing in this should allow you to be racist, sexist, arrogant, and think you're better than other working people.
Yeah.
And that's how I talk to people.
Mm.
I always say, this is the trick. The system does want you to become arrogant. And the system wants you, but I'm the hardest pay. Until you get injured. But that's not the point. Your life may be working great. But do you care about anybody else but yourself or your own family? Do you care about the black child that has no food, the white kid in Appalachia? Do you care about people with carpal tunnel or black lung disease? Do you care about people in the third world? So I've never talked to workers in what I call workerism. Lenin said that the role of the communist is to be what's called a tribune of the people. And economism talks to workers about being workers. So the Revolutionary Union used to go, you worker, boss attack you. Workers fight boss. Boss steal your money through, No, man. I mean, that's not the point. You have to look at the whole world as the proletariat. And the whole other side is the bourgeoisie. If you're not on the side of the third world, if you're not on the side of the black poor, a woman is part of the proletariat, whether she's working or not. A woman who's on AFDC, American Families for Dependent Children, she's working. And what happened to you? And I can talk like that to people. I can be their friends. I don't just, but they know me and I've talked to them and I care about their life. I felt like I just start with that. I may hear it the first time. It doesn't mean I answer it the first time. I know I have to have that conversation, right? I may choose to find some other point of unity with the person, but I know my job is to have that conversation. And I've been fairly good, and we have been fairly good in persuasion, because right below that surface is an empathy, and for a lot of workers, unfortunately, it's not. And that's the struggle inside the working class. Is, are you a pro-imperialist worker who's angry about some particular thing going on, or are you an empathetic worker who sees your own experience in the larger context?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's...
And also, Breht, because you are very persuasive, by the way, because of your empathy, that discussion you had still with that Palestinian brother, you're the one who they're going to go, that Breht, I know, here he goes, he's talking about women, talking about gay people, but they're going to like it. They're going to respect you. But as he said, so we said, well, you got to admit he's a good worker.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, then everything falls on that last argument, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I'm really dedicating myself to, establishing that first and foremost, and establishing basic relationships before I start, having those more difficult conversations. Because you're right, when you're a stranger with somebody, they don't care, and if you haven't proven yourself, they don't care. I love your point about finding points of unity with people and realizing whether or not this conversation should go to this level or should I wait on this. That's a really interesting nuance of these discussions. And your point about instead of getting them to look up, making them look in the mirror, I think is beautifully stated and really resonated with me as a powerful thing. I actually have a little historical event that I'm curious about, and that
please.
feeds into this conversation perfectly, which is the notorious Hard Hat Riot.
Right.
There was a recent PBS documentary. I know you were active at this time. Can you kind of talk about that and the contradictions of working in the Imperial Corps and being pro-war in that way, and just what that event was?
One more thing about the working class that I want to say was, I don't know why, but people confide in me. They always do. They can, within a minute. And that same worker was telling her, he says, the problem is my wife and I are going to fight over this, or I am worried about losing my house, or I know how hard I work, but I'm worried, how many years can I do this? There'll be a vulnerability that's real. There'll be an empathy that's real. You can't change somebody. Mao said the basis of change is internal and the conditions to change are external. So if there's nothing going on with that precedent about empathy, then you can't create empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. But if the person is an empathetic soul and maybe they're a little obsessed with themselves and maybe they have to, not maybe racist and sexist, homophobic attitude, I always say everybody's got a left wing. You can find the thing within them that does align with our values and show them the contradiction between that and the rest of their values. And besides being a good worker is, I don't know, workers will always come to my station and want to talk to me. And one more story is that I'm in a bus and we're going to Sacramento, and to stop the plant closing, this guy named Sam Rodriguez is sitting next to me. And he's going through this whole thing about his marriage and what's going on. And the guy behind me, Mike Gomez, who's in the Communist Workers' Party, said, I never thought of that people would talk to you about their marriages. I'm always talking to them about the proletariat. But I realized that if people won't share with you what's really going on with them, that we have no ability to relate to them. So I know that about you, Breht, particularly, I mean that, you're a very empathetic soul. I think all the good organizers that I know are great with people. People like them. They give a damn about the person to whom they're talking. And that's still got to be the baseline for any conversation.
Absolutely. And at the core of that empathy and that ability to relate to people is just a genuine love. It's like, that's the core emotion, is love for other human beings and for your fellow worker and your fellow person on this planet. And once you lead with love, you really do open up. And I think what you're getting at when people feel comfortable coming to you, even though they know you for very short periods of time, I have that as well, is because they intuitively and even subconsciously feel that love that's emanating off of you, and they feel that they're not going to be judged or condemned, that you are a safe person that they can confide in. And people want to confide. Like, think about how many people who, have a lot of difficulties in their lives, but have very little to no one to actually confide in or to have those conversations to. I'll sometimes come across somebody where it's very clear they've been looking for somebody to confide in and might not have that. And to be that person for somebody else, I think it's a rewarding and meaningful experience for sure.
Word for word.
Yeah. Did you
Let's go to the hard hats.
Yeah.
Let's go to the hard hats.
I would love your take on the hard hat, right?
What we were looking at was the beginning of a class struggle between the university elite and the working class.
The protest movement just got so much bigger.
I'm a Marine, and you take that flag and throw it on the floor and step on it. You just made it personal.
I felt they had a beating coming.
A bunch of construction workers attacked the students.
And then one thing led to another, and then it started being a riot.
My best recollection of May 8th was the usual routine. Coming out onto the street, but you could hear a lot of activity at 7. It was too much for 7 o'clock in the morning.
We were assigned to come in early to the precinct, and we were told we're going down to Wall Street.
Several hundred college and high school students declared a war of disruption in New York City today. The demonstrators gather on Wall Street.
Word came by word of mouth that there's going to be a demonstration down in Lower Manhattan.
There was hundreds and hundreds of construction workers at different locations. So everybody that you seen was in line with that. They were energized.
The place was full. The entire square was full.
We're going to stop South Street tomorrow, we're going to start New York City on Monday, and we're going to bring the whole country down with us next week. And then Nixon's going to have to respond. I don't know, maybe he's going to come down with his fist. A lot of people probably think so. But let's find out now.
To us, as a working stiff, let's put it all blue collar, you would just have people go to college to beat the draft. and they had money, and they let the working class people fight the wars.
I sort of fancied myself as a documentary filmmaker, so I had bought my Super 8mm camera along, and I was going to film. And I heard, in the distance, I heard chants of USA, USA. And then these hard hat workers, they were it was like a march, it was like a parade. They were marching on the street.
As they approached closer, we saw two streets also having large groups of people walking towards us.
I saw them disparaging the flag. That drew the line with me.
And then one thing, push come to shove, words started back and forth, and that's when it started getting a little rousy.
You know what's coming. You know there's going to be a fight.
And all of a sudden, boom. Everybody's swinging.
I was in the middle of the pack. The adrenaline was rushing. I was part of a mob. We were in something big.
The hard hat riot and the tumult and the division that will overtake New York City is a microcosm of the divides and the polarization that will come to define American life.
Well, the first thing I think is bullshit is that's a Marxist term, bullshit, but the point is that the hard hats did represent, sadly, the majority of white workers. They did. Obviously, the Klan was worse than the hard hats. The majority of white people who you see, that I still see that picture of the kids trying to integrate Little Rock, them schools, and the white people screaming, and you want their faces. I don't have love for them, and I don't have empathy for them. I don't think I can find a common anything with them. I don't. They are the worst versions of the U.S. imperialist white settlers. They're the white settlers.
Yeah.
They're the people who, every time the United States even tried to make a treaty with the indigenous people, which was always a bad treaty, it was always the white workers who would say, no, I'm going to go right and seize the next piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what the treaty says. So in my effort to talk about empathy and caring, I have to remember that most of the people I talk to are black. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people I talk to are Latina and Latinx. And, the white people as a group, and I'm glad I got to clarify this, the imperialism does not just run by imperialists. It's a deep cultural reality in which large numbers of people, majority, are involved in the day-to-day running of imperialism. It's not just abstractly they benefit, but they're security guards, they're prison guards, they're police, the number of people who join the Marines, the Army, go abroad to kill people. The whites who are 65% of whom voted for Trump, the whites who hate GEI because they know. White people know they're inferior to black people. They do. And they're frightened if you feel it. And if a black person does anything, it must be because in the racist mind, they were given something they don't deserve. Because the only thing worse than being white is an unsuccessful white person. It's devastating to white people. How the hell, they love the white millionaire, and they hate the black worker. So the first thing I'm saying is that our hard hats were elevated by the system at a time when large numbers of white people were being great. The greatest breakthrough we've had, mainly white middle-class people, college students, but there were white working-class students too who were refusing to go to Vietnam, or went to Vietnam and fragged their officers. There was the biggest split inside the white world, which does not exist today. And so the elevation of the hard hat was the system's elevation to say to the average white worker, your job is to beat up those anti-war worker kids, especially the white kids. Because those white kids are anti-American. Those white kids love black people. Those white kids love the communists in Vietnam. And we got to count on the majority of white people to beat them. And we're urging you to beat them. So it's not just the police. So the whole elevation of those hard hats was symbolic. I was in Boston, and I was approached by a guy named Chuck Turner, who you could look up, a very well-known black leader then. And they had built this movement of black people in the building trades. So Tufts University was building a building with all white labor. And we had a demonstration, they had a demonstration to demand black people be in the construction industry. And there were, 20 black people and 20 of us from SDS maybe marching. And those white workers came up against us with wrenches, threw boulders at us. They were trying to kill us.
Wow.
And the police came, and I had never seen anything like that. This is in the North. And the police came and half-heartedly tried to break things up, just enough where we could get the hell out of there. But I saw white workers wanting to kill people to protect their white jobs. So my point is, it took me a while to figure out what is my line on this, that the system was scared it was losing white people who have been, of course, the heart and soul of U.S. imperialism. And to see so many kids burning their draft card, not going to Vietnam, you always let me go. That, the Powell Commission, right? The Justice Powell started this whole group of ruling class people who were saying we're losing the country. It's becoming anti-corporate. The average person doesn't believe in big business anymore. We have to have a 30-year campaign to win the argument. But they weren't that racist. Not to say they weren't, but it was mainly about private property and corporate. But the system runs on the mass support of white people, and sadly, substantial support, not majority, of Black and Latinx and other people. They need a mass pro-imperialist move. And since Trump ran as imperialist and Kamala Harris ran as an imperialist, Kamala Harris said, I'm going to have the most lethal, if I'm elected, I'll be the Margaret Thatcher of the military world. There was no anti-imperialist possibility in that election. So I guess the point I'm getting to, took me a while, is the central role of good white people to stand up to the racist majority, which they are, the racist white majority, to build structures of resistance, collectives. A lot of the kids, when I went to USC, there were, many Black and Latinx, but there was a lot of white kids there for Palestine, a lot of Jews for Palestine. So I guess what I'm saying is that they want to make us look like we were drug-induced hippies and get a job. We were spoiled children of the middle class. To get the angry, and this is interesting, Breht, to go back to the workers in the factory and say, I'm a hard worker. And every time you'd march, they say, get a job. And get a job is like the answer to you people, you students who don't have a job, don't understand. So it took a while to unravel this, but my main conclusion is, one, is the majority of white people cannot be approached by empathy. They can't. But a substantial minority can, and we have to try with everybody until proven otherwise. Secondly, we have to ask white people to stand up against white racism and white imperialism. That's the test of, is there any real empathy? And yes, the hard hats were the well-paid construction workers who represented the heart of the white oppressed nation.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'll say is the reason I don't agree with Bernie Sanders and or the Occupy people,
Mm-hmm.
not the 99% against the 1%. I wish it was.
Mm.
The majority of people inside the United States are integrated into U.S. imperialism or for U.S. imperialism. And it's not the 99% against the 1%. It is the majority of black people, the majority of Latinos, the majority of oppressed people, plus a substantial number of whites that must be in alliance with the third world. There is no ability for majority movements in the United States ever for socialism or anti-imperialism. That's important. There's a minority movement that's so powerful that it causes contradictions inside the system.
Mm.
And allied with China and Venezuela and Cuba and Palestine, that's our obligation inside the United States.
Mm. Could not agree more, and incredibly perfectly said. You're absolutely right. And breaking down that 99 versus 1%, I see the attempt is to try to make it all of us versus them, but it really wrinkles over contradictions more than it clarifies what's actually real and the real forces at play here. So I think that's important. Well, I want to say this. We're coming up on 2 hours. I think yeah. I think we're going to have a part 3, which I'm totally on board for if you are.
Yeah.
So actually, I just want to ask one more question to wrap up here, and then when you come back on, we'll go back into your life story, the bus riders union, the fight for the soul of the cities, and we'll ask some other questions, and we'll do the reading that you had planned and everything like that, and we won't wait as long to record this.
No, it's good, Brett.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I wanted to say before I forget.
Please do.
It was the Chicano and black workers and the black community in the Van Nuys story who represented the ethical basis of class and race in the United States, who did well beyond the self-interested struggle. It was the role of white women, black women, and a lot of good white guys and women. A lot of the white workers at Van Nuys, because they were not the majority, because it was predominantly Chicano and black plant, they were anti-racist a lot because they were working a lot with thousands of, so I think the GM Van Nuys story has a lot of very positive discussions of class, race, and gender.
Absolutely. All right, so here's the last question for today.
Okay.
And again, we'll have you back on to talk about so much more, but kind of connecting what you were just saying up to the contemporary moment and getting a little bit of your present analysis. You've argued that the United States is not drifting towards fascism, but that it already functions as a permanent fascist state, with Trump and Biden representing two wings of the same counterinsurgency. I just want to kind of open the floor to you for the next 10 to 15 minutes and just kind of get your analysis on this and what you mean by the idea that the United States is a permanent fascist state.
Well, Brad, I want to say again that I prepare a lot for our meetings, but you give me the chance by having the time. Sometimes I'm getting clearer in my own mind in the process of trying to answer the question. So the length is not simply because I do talk in long concepts, but I'm very appreciative. Now, let me make the basic argument. We start with what is the definition of fascism, because that's the argument. Fascism is any system in which one group of people, generally based on race, oppress whole nations of people. That's to say, imperialism is by its very nature fascist. Any group of settlers are by their nature fascist. Any people carrying out genocide are by their nature fascist. So it's like we call somebody a fascist instead of what is the structural understanding. My belief is way before 1492, the creation of a Catholic, feudal, already capitalist Europe, led by Spain and the Catholic Church, developed an ideology of genocide. And that was reflected in the called the terrible trilogy of the Spanish Inquisition against the Jews, the Spanish attack on the Black Moors, and the Spanish invasion of the Americas. Each of them involved a genocidal approach to another group of people who were not white Christians. So if in fact genocide is integral to the development of capitalism and imperialism, how can you say that in France, whether they had free elections or not, is irrelevant? The form of government of the genocidal state cannot be called bourgeois democracy. And I think certain Marxists, by calling it bourgeois democracy, are in fact supporting imperialism, because bourgeois as the adjective and democracy as the verb is the noun. So you're saying America is democratic, but it's a bourgeois democracy. Until we have a proletarian democracy, it can never be fully democratic. It's ridiculous. The United States is fascist by its very nature. Now, when black people fight for democratic rights, they are fighting for democratic rights under a specific form of fascism. They deserve the right to vote under fascism. They deserve the right to sit in public accommodations. But how is it possible that 800,000 black people are in prison? How is it possible that virtually every black person has been arrested? Every black person has somebody in their family in prison or on the way or probation. So it's not even like, now if you see black people as an oppressed nation, it still points out that the United States cannot possibly carry out democracy because its very nature is fascist. Now, fascist includes a police state. We live in a police state. If you have 800 military bases, are we going to focus that? Are we going to take the money out of politics? If we have the CIA and the FBI in every country in the world overthrowing every government in the world, that's by its very nature fascist. Now, that does not negate certain struggles for democratic rights, but it has to be democratic rights under fascism. Because in the specific form of U.S. government, we have ostensibly free elections, which is a joke. And if I have to go through a whole critique of what's wrong with the electoral system, if there's two imperialist parties, both of whom are running on the subjugation of black people, including the Democratic Party, if you go into any city in the country, who's putting black people in jail? The Democrats. So, if in fact capitalist democracy was based on the theoretical exploitation of the proletariat, or the white European proletariat, by the white bourgeoisie, and if in fact white people who are poor were not racially stigmatized, which of course they were because they were white, they would also be Christian. The system focused on the exploitation of those people. That would not be fascism. That was what Marx said, that the hypocrisy of capitalism was the stealing of the workers and then the stealing of their labor by the landlord and the merchant. But Marx did not say in 1793 that the French Revolution of 89, went to Haiti to create genocide against the Haitians. So how can you tell about the French Revolution being bourgeois democracy even, when in fact both parties, the royalty, the nobility, the church, and the capitalists all agreed in racial genocide all over the world. So I don't believe that you take a society based on genocide, like saying is Israel a democracy?
Right.
That's a good one. Well, we have to defend Israeli democracy when it has no right to even exist.
Yeah.
I think the United States has no right to exist in its present form. The fact that we may not overthrow it, we have to begin with the moral continuation that this is a white settler state, which means a white settler state is by nature fascist, by nature illegitimate, and has to be overthrown whether we can or not. It's our obligation to explain it needs to be overthrown. It has no moral legitimacy. So if you go back to Marxism, saying that the United States has bourgeois democracy, at the same time of committing genocide against Black people, indigenous people, and Palestinian people, you as a Marxist are coming up with a pro-imperialist whitewashing of U.S. imperialism by implying there is such a thing as democracy under genocide.
Absolutely. Amen. Amen. Could not agree more. And that's, I think, a great note to end this part of our conversation on, because we will continue this. I have so many more questions to ask you. But I really loved tapping not only your reservoir of life experience and the historical events you lived through, but your keen, sharp, clear-sighted theoretical analysis. The ability for you to continue to have such sharp analysis of the present conditions and having had that for decades and decades and decades, it's really, really impressive. And I think it's essential that people in my generation and younger learn from all the life experience of veterans in the class struggle like yourself. So again, thank you so much for coming on. This is only part 2. We'll have a part 3, probably a part 4.
I just said, at the rate we're going.
Part 10.
And Eric Mann at Eric at Voices from the Front Lines.
Okay.
Met more appreciation than I can express.
Wonderful.
Great to work with you.
You too, as always. And I'll link to that in the show notes. People can reach out to you directly if they want to. All right, my friend. We'll talk soon, and thank you so much.
Take good care of yourself, brother.
Thank you for listening. Rev Left Radio is 100% listener funded. If you like what we do here, you can support us at patreon.com/Rev Left Radio or make a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/Rev Left Radio. Links will be in the show notes.